My name is Carrie Berger, and I am the Forestry and Natural Resource Extension Fire Program Manager. Thank you so much, Melanie, for the invitation to speak today. It's so wonderful to see so many people from across the country tuning in to our presentation today. John?
Hey everybody, I'm John Putchess. I'm an associate professor at Oregon State University and one of the extension foresters. I have the privilege of working primarily in the northeastern corner of the state in the beautiful Blue Mountains and work on a variety of different fire and natural resource related projects. Back to you, Carrie.
Excellent. So Melanie, if it's okay, I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Does that sound good? Okay, wonderful. And everybody can hear me okay and see my slides okay? Wonderful. Okay. Well, thanks again for having John and I come to this session today to talk with you all about Oregon State University's prescribed fire and education. And let's see if I can advance my slides. Okay. So before we dive in and talk about that, I want to first set the stage by talking about the Wildfire Challenge to give some context to why prescribed fire education and training is so critical here in Oregon. For those of you who already know and understand the Wildfire Challenge, just stick with me because I'll share some about the benefits of prescribed fire and the work the Forestry and Natural Resource Extension Group is doing related to prescribed fire. And then I'll turn it over to John, who will talk about the prescribed fire efforts in the College of Forestry, what has worked, what some of the challenges have been, and then we'll end on a high note with some opportunities. Okay, so let's get started. So when I think about changes to historical fire patterns, I visualize this three-legged stool where the legs are the main drivers of changes, including policies and a culture that supports fire suppression, of course, a changing climate, and then more people living in fire-prone places. And so that's where I want to start with people. Fire has a role within each of Oregon's diverse landscapes, and fire also likely has a role within the landscapes you live. And since time immemorial, Indigenous peoples have stewarded these lands using fire. There are actually written accounts from European settlers in the 1800s of the local tribes of the Willamette Valley here in Oregon treating the understory and reducing conifer growth in oak savanna with prescribed fire. By the late 1800s, the population of Oregon was about 175,000 people. Today, there are over 4 million people, with 3 million of those people living in the Willamette Valley. So this means that most of that oak savanna that once existed in this area has now been developed for cities and towns or converted to agriculture or industrial timberlands. So historically essential for life, fire now seems more like a threat to develop communities and the resources that sustain them. So with the growing population in the late 1800s to early 1900s, and really not enough scientific understanding of the benefits of fire to help clean up our forests and keep things healthy, the United States government ordered full suppression on wildfires and even went as far to exclude burning done by Indigenous peoples. So even in places where fire used to burn naturally and have positive ecological effects, we suppress fire because of the negative consequences to human population. And that is still true today. So despite our previous lack of scientific understanding of fire benefits, we now today recognize the necessity of fire for the health of our forest ecosystems. But unfortunately, a culture of fear around wildfire and even prescribed fire to some extent persists in the United States. You probably grew up with Smokey the Bear messaging. That campaign was really convincing, right? So, I mean, who wants to be responsible for hurting Bambi? What happens when we learn to fear and reject fire is that we create an environment where fire is not able to play its part in maintaining healthy levels of fuels in our forests, especially in those forest types that used to experience frequent low severity fire, like in those oak savannas and also like in ponderosa pine forests. Without fire, these ecosystems suffer from encroachment of conifer trees and invasive species, and then become less resilient to drought, insect, and disease. In the absence of good fire, over time, we create a buildup of fuels that, under extreme weather conditions, can produce wildfires with much more negative effects. And so that leads us to the final leg of that three-legged stool, which is climate. Here we are looking at a shift in the global temperature, or in the shift in the global average surface temperature, where Earth's temperature has risen by an average of 0.14 degrees Fahrenheit per decade since the 1880s, or that's about 2 degrees Fahrenheit in total. In Oregon, the average winter temperatures are increasing, and we are seeing a trend of more winter precipitation coming as rain instead of snow. And snowpack, as you probably are aware, is critical because it is basically the reservoir that keeps our forests moist throughout the summer, right? So compared to snowpack levels in the 1950s, snowpack in Oregon has decreased up to 80% in some areas. And this is really troublesome because the earlier the snow melts, the less water is available to keep our forests moist into fire seasons. Why does this matter, though? Well, this matters because fuel conditions affect how a fire behaves. Very dry fuels are more prone to catching and spreading fire and produce more extreme fire behavior. So taking these three big changes, these legs of the stool together, not each one separately, but together, this really puts us in the hot seat. In the last 40 years, we've seen substantial increases in the number of wildfires, the size of those fires, fire intensity, the length of fire season, and of course, the consequences of fire, which the consequences to humans are huge, right? With increased structure and resource loss, threats to municipal water supply and other critical infrastructure, increased days with hazardous air quality. And to top things off, these consequences are felt disproportionately in communities that have the least resources to buffer themselves from environmental hazards. So, to help mitigate the risk of extreme wildfire and get us out of that hot seat, we must use all the tools in our manager's toolbox, including prescribed fire. Prescribed fire is the intentional application of fire under specified weather conditions and other parameters used to meet management or cultural objectives, such as fuel reduction, ecosystem restoration, and I believe is part of the wildfire solution. So as I mentioned earlier, prescribed fire has been used for thousands of years by indigenous peoples and has a range of benefits, including control over the spread of insects and disease. Prescribed fire helps to remove unwanted species that threaten other native species. It provides forage for game like deer and elk. Prescribed fire improves habitat for threatened and endangered species. It recycles nutrients back to the soil, promotes the growth of trees, wildfires, other plants, and importantly, prescribed fire reduces hazardous fuels, protecting human communities from those extreme wildfires. It's important to point out fire has a complex interaction with the ecosystem, and that for every benefit, there is the potential for negative effects if fire is not applied thoughtfully and with the end results clearly in mind. So this photo was taken after the 2021 Boot Lake fire in Oregon and demonstrates the value of using prescribed fire. The trees in the bottom portion of your screen were thinned prior to the fire and got pretty scorched, but they fared much better than the forest at the top of your screen in that no treatment unit where the fire completely consumed those trees. Then in the middle of your screen, you have trees that were thinned and then treated with prescribed fire. So because there wasn't a lot of fuel to burn within those trees, the fire settled down and didn't burn those trees as intensely as the other two stands of trees we just talked about. So now that I've shared some context about the Wildfire Challenge and the benefits of prescribed fire, let's dive into Oregon State University's prescribed fire education and training. I'm going to start with the story of the Forestry and Natural Resource Extension Fire Program and then hand it over to John for him to elaborate on the prescribed fire efforts happening in the College of Forestry. So as part of our Forestry and Natural Resources Extension, or from now on, I'm just going to say F&R to shorten that up. As part of our F&R annual planning process, we conduct yearly needs assessments and ask private landowners and natural resources professionals what they think is the greatest educational need. And so consistently for years, the top priority need was education about wildland fire. Long story short, because of this identified need in 2017, a group of us worked to develop the concept of an extension fire program. And then in 2019, the program was funded under House Bill 5050 by the state of Oregon. So the mission of the fire program is to foster the resiliency of communities and landscapes to fire at scale in the state of Oregon. To accomplish this, the fire program is made up of a team of 8, including myself as the manager, a director, and 6 regional fire specialists. The regional fire specialists have been strategically placed across the state to serve every county in Oregon, and they work closely with the F&R Extension foresters in their areas. This, of course, is a key aspect of the fire program, having these specialists live and work within service areas to build those relationships to better understand the needs, because what a community or landscape might need in Central Oregon is going to be different from what's needed in the Valley. So it was during the launch of the fire program that I submitted a nomination for the New Technologies for Agriculture Extension, or NTAE award, for a fellowship that would help the team launch a certified burn manager program with the intent to increase the scope and scale of prescribed burning across both public and private lands. We believed that, or still believe, that proper prescribed fire education and training could help alleviate fear of fire and would promote professional development in fire, of course, foster collaboration, learning, and network building, and provide flexible opportunities with an emphasis on local context to train a variety of professionals and landowners who have very different needs. And you can read more about my NTAE project by scanning that QR code. If you're not up for that, I'll go ahead and put the link in the chat. I think Melanie might even do that at the end for us also. So what the fire program has been able to accomplish to date, in part, is because of the support we received early on. I'd like to spend just the last couple of minutes of my time highlighting some of the great prescribed fire work F&R Extension and the fire program are doing together. So members of F&R Extension and the fire program have contributed to policy work, including providing invited testimony to the State Committee on Natural Resources and Wildfire Recovery on opportunities for maximizing prescribed burning in Oregon. And also, we've had committee membership on House Bill 2571 for the prescribed fire liability study. We've contributed expertise through the Oregon Prescribed Fire Council to garner bipartisan legislative support for the Senate Bill 762, which is the 2021 Omnibus Wildfire Bill that established more than a dozen new programs, including the development of the Certified Burn Manager program. And John will share more details about this program in just a minute. We've provided a diversity of prescribed fire education and outreach opportunities, including podcast episodes, a website, a national virtual chat on liability, insurance, and training formats. We provide formal and non-formal presentations, classroom and outdoor offerings, and even low-tech equipment demonstrations. We also published Prescribed Fire Basics, which is a collection of 11 modules aimed to provide introductory level information to increase the understanding of the importance and mechanics of prescribed burns. And I'll go ahead and put that link in the chat at the end of my presentation so you can have access to that. We provided a level 1 training for the Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS, District Conservationists, to gain job approval authority by participating in our 3-day learning experience on the basics of prescribed fire. So this training allowed the DCs, or district conservationists, to talk to landowners about the use of prescribed fire on their private lands, and resulted in a 100-fold increase in the number of planned prescribed burn acres. So pretty incredible. The fire program Southwest Regional Fire Specialist has been instrumental in launching one of the first prescribed burn associations in Oregon. The purpose of a PBA, or that Prescribed Burn Association, is to bring together landowners, volunteers, and trained fire professionals to put good fire back on the land by providing training and community building opportunities. And then, of course, we participate in partnerships for landscape scale resiliency projects. For example, one of the regional fire specialists recently contributed his technical expertise and facilitation to a group in Northeast Oregon that ultimately received over $10 million in grant funding to get landscape scale treatments implemented. So I could go on, but I do want to leave time for John to talk about all the great work he has been doing. So I'll end by saying that we need the message that while we have a fire problem, fire itself is not the problem. By rekindling the relationship between people and fire, getting fire back into people's hands and hearts, we can renew the respect for and connection to the element that has long kept landscapes and people across Oregon and other areas across the nation healthy and resilient. Our best chance at healing that relationship, I believe, is through prescribed fire. And so, John, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to talk about the College of Forestry efforts.
Thank you, Carrie. So I'll just kind of pick up there and just to say that I sit in a pretty unique role within the university where I get to do a variety of fire-related work within my extension forestry position. I'm not technically part of the fire team that Carrie manages, but I'm really integrated with them in the way that we work. And I also teach courses on campus and get to do research around fire. So really count myself lucky that I get to have this broad spectrum of engagement with fire, and value the work that I do with Carrie and the other members of the fire program. So if I can just kind of delve into a little bit of the stuff that we're doing through the university at the college level, particularly within the College of Forestry. We have a variety of different teaching and research activities. Carrie, if you can hit the next slide, please. Next slide, please. There we go. Okay. So OSU has a pretty long history of teaching fire within our College of Forestry degree programs. And we have a variety of those targeting different areas, but fire is really integral to a number of those degrees. We have great courses in wildland fire ecology and ecological restoration, which looks at how fire and other techniques can be used post event. We have courses that provide introductory level for undergraduates in topics around wildland fire. We have courses that look at the economics and policy of wildland fire, and then a great course that Dr. John Bailey teaches looking at wildfire science and management. So really kind of getting into the basics of how wildland fire suppression has worked over the years, and even delving a bit into prescribed fire. One of the things that we really have noted though over the last few years is that while we provide people with conceptual background, we were really lacking for some time in the hands-on experience. And I would argue, and I think many of us would, that you don't learn about the way that fire interacts with the environment without actually witnessing, without working on it. So next slide. So we've added to the courses at OSU a couple of new ones over the last couple of years. A colleague and I put together the College of Forestry Guard School. Guard School is kind of an old name for what the firefighter 2, the introductory fire course is. So we provide an opportunity for students to take the fire school and be able to attain their firefighter 2 credentials. And that gives them some hands-on experience, and particularly some experience with learning about the way that fire behaves under different environments. And then we've also developed a very hands-on prescribed fire course called the Prescribed Fire Practicum, which allows students to go through in a very step-by-step manner with design, implementation, monitoring, evaluation of a prescribed fire. So they actually get to design it and do it and then determine how well it worked. And so we're really excited about this course. It's new. We've done it once in a condensed format, and I'm finishing up teaching it this year. But I think this is going to roll into something that's going to be really valuable for students in the future, because it really does give them that firsthand experience with the whole spectrum of what it takes to implement a prescribed fire. Everything from thinking about how you develop the prescription, to how you deal with smoke, to how you get your permits, to what kind of notifications you should be doing with neighbors, all the way down the line. So a really detailed kind of assemblage of different practices within that. So that's a newer course that's been added, and we're continuing to build upon that. I should say that we also are experimenting with a newer course around modeling of fire risk. So people would actually have the skills to develop fire risk maps and things of that nature. So we pilot tested that last year. Dr. Chris Dunn put that together. So we're excited about that, and we'll hopefully be building that into a permanent course moving forward. So next slide, Carrie. In addition to all the work that we do around training students or teaching students, we have just a wide array of fire-related research projects. And I would say that while the number of us in the faculty who actively teach fire is relatively confined, the number of people who are doing research on it is pretty astounding. And so lots of research around identifying our historic fire regimes and really getting into detail with that by doing very detailed dendrochronologies across broad landscapes, lots and lots of research that has really honed in our ability to identify what the historic fire regimes have been, and helped us understand that they were much more frequent in most cases than what we anticipated they would be. There's lots of work around the interaction between fire and water, with looking at hydrology, with looking at water quantity and water quality, with thinking about timing of fire and how that impacts those things, with thinking about the chemical interactions with water. So lots of water related work there. If you can click once, Carrie. We're also doing lots of work that integrates the risk analysis into these different research projects, where we're looking at where is the likelihood of more intense fire, where are the areas that through treatments are likely to have less intense fire, how does that interplay with the severity of the fires, the actual impact they have on the landscape, and hence on the implications for water and for regeneration of different plant species and so on. So lots of work around risk assessment and mapping and GIS. And then one more click. We're also doing some pretty innovative work that uses unmanned aerial systems to actually determine the condition of forests and the underlying landscape, using a variety of LIDAR and different spectra of electromagnetic radiation to determine those forest conditions. And so one of the projects that I'm working on now with a colleague is that we did pre-treatment scans of forests using a variety of different spectra and LIDAR, and then did the treatments and then came back and did the post treatments. And we've got 3D models based on these that are super detailed that show us, not just the traditional kind of stuff I get from doing plots in a forest inventory, but we can really hone into what are the sizes of these trees, what are their diameters, what are their heights, how much of those trees are in crown material, and then relate that back to what the probability is that the forests are going to burn under different conditions, under different levels of intensity. So the research is really growing, and there's just tremendous number of opportunities in that. And we have a lot of graduate student interest in pursuing fire-related research in the field. So next slide. One of the other things that we're really keenly working on is revision of our overall fire approach to teaching, and then adding to it so that we can be more of use to people who are in the world of professional fire management. So not so much as like the chief of a fire station. That's not really where we're focused, but for people who work in federal agencies or with state agencies in the professional fire manager roles, the fire management officers, so to speak. So these are the people who do think about suppression, but they're really more focused around the ecological interaction with fire within the lands that they are responsible for. And they report to other people who may have wildlife roles and timber management roles, but fire plays a very key role in the way that all of these forests function within the west of the United States. So a lot of work would go into this particular degree program or certificate program to help people be really more in tune with the ecosystems and the interplay of fire within those ecosystems. We see this as being a very multidisciplinary program where we would not just focus on forested ecosystems, but also work with desert and rangeland and high steppe and things of that nature, because all of these have roles and are intermixed within the landscapes that are managed by these professionals. It relates to their land management practices, but it's also really about helping them be better leaders and more equipped to do the management roles within these professional fire activities. They've got to have aspects of budgets, aspect of project management, and a really keen eye for risk management, not only the risk management associated with directly responding to fires, but the risk management with not responding to fires, or the risk management with allowing areas to continue to build up fuel loads, as Carrie mentioned, right? So ultimately helping them be better decision makers. So as I've kind of hinted at here, this is a revision of our existing curriculum and perhaps a revision of one of our existing natural resource-based degree programs to be more focused on professional fire manager. We've committed at a minimum that we'll have a certificate of professional fire management that will be added into our curriculum and really allow people to have those credentials to be able to move forward and be successful in these professional careers. So lots of work moving forward with that pretty big project with a lot of faculty members involved to think about how we can really redesign our curriculum in order to better serve this important group of folks. Next slide, Carrie. So let's move then and just think then about what does it take to go beyond the research and teaching components and put some of this to work in people's hands, because we really recognize collectively within our faculty and educators here at Oregon State University that the work within fire, you've got to have the conceptual foundation, but you've got to have the practical and the hands-on to go with it. Next slide. So we're doing a variety of things. As Carrie mentioned, some of our continuing education and professional development work has focused on our colleagues with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. As she mentioned, there was an initial extension-led effort to really focus on and give people some initial training in that effort and that area. But we've gone beyond that now and developed a very distinct program that helps the NRCS conservationists and technicians to get that job approval authority they need in order to be able to work with landowners and to be able to authorize expenditure of NRCS federal funds to support private land prescribed fire efforts. And so we've got a program that we pilot tested last spring that took people through 4 days of pretty intensive work. They got to do 3 prescribed burns within that and a variety of different conditions. And now we're rolling that into a potential national training school that will start this spring. and be a week-long course and actually include some more components around how to develop burn plans. The initial one was all about how to recognize when they were presented with a viable burn plan. Now we're really thinking about how can we take them that next step and let them be the technical experts that will help in development of burn plans. And so that's next on the horizon for this spring. Next step, next slide. As Carrie mentioned, we're also very engaged in development of the Certified Burn Manager program. The Certified Burn Manager category or idea has been kind of enshrined in Oregon's statutes for quite a number of years, but it was really kind of in a holding mode. Nobody was actually doing it. It wasn't developed to the stage where somebody could be a certified burn manager. And so as we've watched other states roll this out and been successful in encouraging more burning through providing this professional training throughout their states, Oregon's become one of those. And so in our last full legislative session, it was the implementation process was outlined, and it's administered by our Oregon Department of Forestry, which is the primary entity that not only provides permitting for forestry activities on private grounds, but also is responsible for fire suppression. Well, now they have the job also of integrating with folks around the Certified Burn Manager program. I and others were engaged with Oregon Department of Forestry personnel to develop the instructional criteria to really define what would go into the training programs. And now OSU is, I believe, the first officially recognized trainer provider for the Certified Burn Manager program. And we're in the rapid development phase of putting the curriculum together for that program and targeting delivery of that in spring of 2024. So lots of work going on that. And I really think there's going to be some really key outcomes of that, hopefully not only encouraging the scale and pace of prescribed fire and prescribed plans, but really demonstrating that we can do this very safely and with a high level of professionalism. Next slide. Many of you have probably heard of TREX. So this is the training exchange program focused on prescribed fire. It's typically led by the Nature Conservancy around the country, with a high degree of involvement from Forest Service and a variety of other federal and state agencies. In Oregon, Extension and OSU have been invited to work in this arena. And so we've been collaborating with the Nature Conservancy and with other partners around their TREX programs. Last season, I was delighted to spend 2 weeks with folks from all over the country, actually from all over the continent. I got to do the TREX program in Central Oregon, which is really well developed, and delivered the fire effects monitoring module there, trained 6 or so people to be fire effects monitors. And we really see lots of opportunity to continue to contribute to that and help grow that program. Our personnel have been involved as public information officers. We've worked directly in helping organize and deliver some of these programs. We're getting ready to offer the Central Oregon TREX again next year. If you're a prescribed fire practitioner and have not done a TREX, you need to apply and get into one of these programs. These are really excellent training opportunities. And we're now in discussion about doing another, at least initially a shorter version, TREX in northeastern Oregon, focused on tribal entities and really trying to provide opportunities for folks new to prescribed fire to really gain that expertise in a hands-on mechanism. So lots of opportunity around TREX. These are exciting programs, and I think they're some of the best training out there. Next slide. And I'd be remiss to not think about the work that we do internally just to help those of us who do fire attain and maintain our qualifications. Working in the fire world is kind of a hard thing. And so if you're in the fire world as part of an agency that provides fire suppression, you're probably hooked up with a way that you are going to get opportunities to take training opportunities, to take advantage of training, to get your certifications from courses that you've taken, and to then go through the process of completing a task book on a variety of different fires in order to come up with your qualifications. Well, when we're in the academic world, when we're in extension and teaching and research positions, we may not have easy access to those. And so in addition to having the student-focused version of our Firefighter 2 course, the Guard School, we also offer that a couple times a year for people who are OSU employees or graduate students, because they often need that basic entry qualification in order to get access to sites that have recently burned on federal lands in order to do their research. And so we've been providing opportunities for OSU grad students and employees to get their qualifications. And then we're working through the process of how those of us who are more engaged in fire and doing lots of prescribed fire and even some fire suppression activities, how we can, through OSU, have those opportunities. And so we're looking at different opportunities with a couple different partners for entry into the qualification record systems and our ability to dispatch and actually respond. So that's an area with a lot of challenges, but it's also areas where we're working through that and finding opportunities. Next slide, Carrie. So let's wrap up by just kind of thinking about some of the challenges we've faced, some of the things that are working, and maybe with some of the opportunities, right? And I think let's go ahead and just do next slide and start with some of the things that are really working well. So one of the observations that I've made is that you don't get to do prescribed fire or really any other firefighting type stuff on your own. It's always a collaborative partnership effort. We're working across multiple agencies. We're working across people with different skill sets. We're bringing together different types of resources in order to accomplish our objectives. And I would say that one of the key things that has allowed OSU to venture farther into addressing prescribed fire is our great working relationships with a variety of different entities, right? So the photograph that you see there is of a fire engine owned by one of our tribal partners. And so the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla has been doing awesome fire-related work on the lands that it owns and manages up in northeastern Oregon and southeastern Washington. And they've been really gracious in providing opportunities for OSU personnel to engage in that, right? The same can be said of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The same can be said of opportunities with Bureau of Land Management, with Forest Service, with Oregon Department of Forestry, with contractors who provide opportunities for us to not only have our students be employed by them, but to have these opportunities for collaborative training. And so these are really important partnerships that allow us to do the work that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise, because as I mentioned before, OSU isn't a fire suppression or fire management agency, but we certainly have a skill set and a knowledge base to bring to bear on these issues. And so we do that by working with our partners. One of the other things that is really, I think, key to our ability to work effectively is that while we have the Forestry and Natural Resources Extension Program, and then within that, the fire program, this is a diverse set of people. We have folks like myself who are classically trained as foresters who are now shifting more into fire because that's the environment that we work in now. We have other folks who came in through the fire program who are trained more on the fire sciences and the ability to engage with communities around fire issues, but we're able to interact and say, here's the forestry issues around those, right? And that just can get replicated, repeated in all kinds of different machinations as you look at different partners within the university. And so that integration, that ability to work together within the Forestry and Natural Resources program and between the fire and forestry components of that, I think has really been key to some of the success in our efforts. We have great support from faculty who aren't extension. And so within our university, those faculty members that I mentioned that are teaching all of the fire courses, they've been very keen on helping provide a greater base of knowledge and opportunity for all of us to work together. And we have lots of student interest, both in taking courses, but also just engaging with us whenever we provide these hands-on opportunities. I recently did the prescribed fire hands-on day for students associated with the class that I'm teaching around prescribed fire, but I opened it up and invited students broadly. As long as they had basic firefighter qualifications, they could come and participate. And we had great turnout and a really good training day. Weather wasn't perfect, but it was a great training day and lots of engagement. Maybe I just add a couple of things that aren't right there on the screen, but we really benefit in the College of Forestry from having a dean and department heads who really are committed to seeing this work go forward. They recognize the role that fire, both wildfire and prescribed fire, human engaged fire, human managed fire has played in these landscapes historically, and they want our college to have a key active role in that. So it really helps when we come to do these that we've got people who are our supervisors, our bosses up at, higher in the hierarchy that really are supportive of all this process. Next slide. So a few challenges. Any of you who do prescribed fire know that one of the selling points for prescribed burns is we don't do them when the conditions are going to be likely to lead to intense fire that could potentially get out of our desired unit, our burn unit, right? So we look for these things called burn windows. Well, burn windows in some parts of the United States are pretty consistent, and you can count on them. And you know that if you can't burn in South Carolina, you can cross the border and burn in Georgia, right? And so for some programs that have a more regional approach, there's lots of opportunities to collaborate and work across state lines and really look for areas that are burnable even when your area isn't burnable. In Oregon, we're a pretty good sized state. And while we have some opportunities to burn in Washington, in California and so on like that, our conditions tend to be relatively similar. And so we have challenges in finding burn windows from year to year that are consistent enough to actually plan for educational programs. Like you need to put them on the calendar in advance. And it's kind of hard to say, we'd like to have an educational program and we're going to do this burn sometime in April or May, or maybe June, right? And so the burn window challenge is recurring. But I think one of the takeaways I've gleaned from actually doing this now for several years is that you can have really good education and training, even if the burn itself is on the wet side. And so I'm just kind of at the point where even if the day is drizzle and rain, we're still going to do the training because otherwise we may miss that burn window all around. And so there's good training that can happen either way. As I work more with students, I've discovered that it is really difficult at Oregon State University to find blocks of time to move students out of the building and into the woods or the fields to do prescribed fire or any other field related course. They just have a lot of courses they need to take in order to meet degree requirements. And those are not all under the control of the college that I happen to work for. And so it's really difficult sometimes to figure out how to schedule things in order to work for students, right? And that even comes down to doing summer type programs. We could say that we're going to do a 2-week long practicum in the summer, but that means that that's 2 weeks that they can't work on some other job, and that can often be challenging to schedule. I mentioned that we're taking steps and doing things to provide people with their basic qualifications, but I will say that probably one of the biggest challenges that I've had to face was just thinking through this qualification maintenance systems. Like, how do we document the effort that we have individually on fires and in a way that allows us to progress, advance, or even just maintain the fire qualifications we've worked so hard to attain? So that's a challenge. We're going to find a way to do that. I think we've got some good new leads opened through partners, but that has been challenging, again, because OSU isn't in and of itself a fire response agency. So really difficult to kind of work our way in through the back door to be able to do that. Another one, and Carrie has taken the brunt of this work, is just thinking through the liability and perceived risk of prescribed fire. And there's an element of that is perceived by landowners. So when we're trying to work with landowners and encourage prescribed fire, we have to be honest to say, yes, it could get away. And in Oregon, that could lead to pretty serious consequences. There's opportunities there for civil liability, and there's certainly opportunities there for recovery by the state of suppression costs. And so those can be pretty significant. But there's a number of new things that are underway. The Certified Burn Manager program, once implemented, people burning with a certified burn manager as their lead get protection from a significant amount of civil liability. And there's opportunities now where we're building these relationships with Oregon Department of Forestry to be more engaged there and use that as a way to reduce that statutory risk, right? But we still face that perceived risk. And like, if you talk about prescribed fire, what if people talk about, oh, Hermit's Peak, it burned up thousands of acres, and right? And the reality is those are really, really rare. And so how do we make the case and build the track record to demonstrate that these are rare events and that by far most of the prescribed fires are not something that causes any undesired damage, right? And then I would say that for all of us, Carrie and I work at frenetic paces almost all the time because we're at the front end of developing this program. And while it's really wonderful that partners are coming to us and saying, hey, can you help us with this? Hey, can we do this? Hey, here's these new opportunities. Hey, can we give you money? It all adds to that developmental workload that can be pretty overwhelming. And there's just a lot of upfront work that goes into building fire-related programs. And so we're happy to share some of our learning experience from that, if that's helpful to others, because it is something that is just a big bunch of stuff that happens up front. And there's never the staffing you need at the beginning of these projects, right? It's almost like you're the venture capitalist and you're doing everything yourself and working 80 hours a week. And then once you finally get established, then you can actually staff for success over the long term. You can think about how to schedule better. We're still in the stage, at least I am, of trying to do everything all the time, all at once. And so that is a significant challenge. Next slide. So let's close with some opportunities, because I don't want to leave you just thinking this is hard to do. It is hard to do, but it's also super fun, right? So one of the rewarding experiences that I've had is just as I engage more and more with agencies, and I really should have put in here contractors as well, that there's a tremendous interest from potential employers for the students that go through our programs. They want to hire people who have an interest in fire and who have some like foundational education in that. They like the idea of people getting the hands-on experience, and they want to provide opportunities. And so we're really at that stage where we're in discussions with different entities around how we can better integrate, how we can provide more opportunities for students, and how we can really get students directed to them for summer employment, but also for careers. There's opportunities here, particularly we've been in discussions with BLM around opportunities for them to hire people, put them through school, get their professional fire management degree, and come back out and be employed in that entity. So really, really great opportunities there for students. I'm really excited about the work that we're doing with Natural Resource Conservation Service. I think it's really awesome that they're investing the amount of time and energy and expense that they have in preparing their people to be more engaged in prescribed fire in those traditional conservationist and technician roles. But I also think that like the secondary effect of this, really maybe the intent of this, is that it's going to allow more private landowners to have access to resources to be able to do burning on their properties intentionally, right? So that impacts me because I'm engaging, doing lots of the professional development stuff, but it also means that there's going to be funding and resources and technical expertise that will be available to our more traditional extension audiences in collaboration with our fire program people. There's lots of interest in cross-boundary burns, and really I would just say lots of interest in collaboration. And so when I go and burn with BAA on tribal property, it's not just obviously BIA and tribal people there, right? It's people from different entities who are being called in and used in those resource capacities. When we're burning on private lands adjacent to federally owned lands, now the discussion is, well, if the federal agencies are already going to burn that adjacent area, is there a way to just cross that land? And the answer is yes, it can be done. They can write those plans in, they can plan for both property ownerships, and they can extend those, and they can use their resources because they can demonstrate that having prescribed fire on those areas adjacent to the federal lands is a benefit to the federal lands and to their management. We're really excited about the Certified Burn Manager program. There's already a lot of people in industry who are doing burning, but this gives them an opportunity to demonstrate that, to have a qualification, to reduce their exposure to civil liability, and to really up their game on how they plan and be able to reduce our smoke implications and things of that nature. So really an exciting program there. And again, I see that is going to have direct benefits for our extension audiences, because these are the professionals that are going to be available to help those extension audiences implement fire on their properties. And finally, I'll just throw in here that one of the exciting newest opportunities that's arising is that the Nature Conservancy here in Oregon has successfully attained funding to develop 3 prescribed fire modules. So smaller sized units, I think they're going to be 10-ish people each, of people dedicated to supporting prescribed fire. So these will be resources that can actually be brought to a private land fire, or brought to a federal fire, or brought to a state or a tribal fire, and they provide expertise, and this is going to be their role. Many of the people who do prescribed fire now and provide that type of support are also suppression folks, right? And so at the times of the year when we would like to have them engaged in prescribed fire, they're often in a different part of the country doing suppression-oriented fire work, right? So these modules would be dedicated to prescribed fire and stay local and be able to really help up the game, if you will, around prescribed fire. So lots of new stuff going on, and I think some great opportunities there across all of our different levels, all our different audiences that we work with. Really great opportunities for us as OSU employees and faculty and staff to engage and gain expertise, but also to share expertise. Great opportunities to have resources that are going to be available to our private landowners, and a great opportunity to really build some resources that are going to be focused on prescribed fire in the state. So Carrie and I will close with that. I think there's one final just thank you slide here, and then we'll open this up for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I just want to reiterate and say thank you to everyone today for joining, taking the time out of your busy schedule to listen in to what Oregon State University is doing around prescribed fire. I know that I explained extension efforts and John explained College of Forestry efforts. They're not done in silos. We work together. It was too much for me to tell the whole story, so we separated out that way. But just know that we do work in collaboration and partnership together and outside our external partners, agency partners, nonprofit organizations, etc. Anybody have any questions for us about the work we do or prescribed fire in general or the wildfire challenge? We'd be so happy to answer those. And it's nice to see some familiar faces on the line, like Eli. I haven't seen you since the last ANREP. Nice to see you.
Since you mentioned my name and since I can't find the thing to raise my hand, I'll just do it the old-fashioned way. John, it's good to see you too. Thank you both for really an excellent presentation. I have so many questions. We're trying to stand up a similar program here in Minnesota. We are one of the 23 states with, John, you said some level of, I think it was you that said some level of certified burn manager program, or certified burner program. And we're trying to get that formalized and so on. And so there are so many questions. In Minnesota, liability is very, very unfavorable to the burner. So if a fire gets away, it's a gross negligence. I think that's the right term. If it gets away for any reason, you're on the hook. And I wonder if you can talk just a little bit. You mentioned that your certified burner program does carry some liability or is going to carry some liability protection. Can you talk a little bit more? Was that a statutory change?
Yeah, that was a statutory change.
Yeah.
So the way it reads is that if a certified burn manager is officially in charge of the burn, that certified burn manager and any of the people reporting to him, right?
Yeah.
And it's specific to volunteers, employees, whatever it may be, are exempt from civil liability except in case of negligence. So you can't get away from the negligence, right? We've had lots of discussion around Oregon, like, well, is it simple negligence? Is it gross negligence? And the answer I think that I've kind of like finally gelled in my mind is it doesn't really matter. It's negligence, right? Yeah. Because in most cases, the case references, the actual outcomes of court cases are so few and far between relative to prescribed fire that it's really hard to know what's going to be described as negligence, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the ways that we hope that Oregon's certified burn manager will assist with that is by having now a clear standard for what do we say like a person who's going to lead burns, what are the qualifications that they should really have, right? There's not a requirement for it, but it almost sets a de facto expectation that if you're going to do these things that you achieve to this standard. And so I think that's going to be helpful. The other piece that Oregon did, which I thought was pretty innovative in this last legislative session, is that they convinced the legislature to implement I believe it's a $5 million pool, an insurance pool that would fund up to the first $1 million per incident for escaped wildfires on private lands. And there's a couple of other categories there, right? So the idea there is that that provides, in essence, some insurance for people who are doing burning. And what we really want to do is like burn for a whole bunch of years and never use that fund as a way to demonstrate to insurance companies that this is really low risk. The problem with insurance companies when they look at it is that there's so little case history. They don't know how to make their risk models for this because there's not enough data points, right? So they assume that it's really, really risky, when the reality is it's not very risky, and that's why there's been so few of these.
Yeah, and Eli, if I could just add in, I would just like us to see there's so much focus on negligence. And like John alluded to, when it comes down to it, there's just not enough cases to really know like what that will look like in court. So I would really like us to focus instead on negligence, whether you're gross or simple or whatever it might be, that we focus on the things to prevent us from getting there in the first place. So like John said, the training or standard operating procedures and etc. So, making sure that everybody, has that understanding before they get to the fire line and conduct these prescribed fires. I think the focus on that versus like the negligence piece will get us a lot further.
Thank you.
Risk reduction as opposed to liability reduction. We know we can reduce risk. And feel free to holler at us. We'll be happy to help think through what you're doing in your state.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I'll go ahead and put my email, and John, if you'll do the same in the chat, please feel free to contact myself or John or both of us, and we can definitely have a conversation with you. Are there any other questions before we head out for today?
I'm hearing none. Can I ask another quick one?
Sure.
That I think might relate to some other states. We have some real opposition from our timber industry here. They're concerned about the effects of char on wood processing. And we have a big pulp and paper industry, very different from a saw timber industry. So that char can really lead to problems. It's understandable. But do you have any experiences to share about how you built support and productive collaborations and engagement with industry around fire?
So I can take a stab at that. I would say that, one, we don't in Oregon have the emphasis around paper products anymore. It's mostly sawn or peeled products. And so there's less of an implication there. Not that it's not there, but there's less of one. And I would say, too, that a lot of our efforts around prescribed fire are occurring in areas that have really distinct historic, frequent, low-intensity fire regimes. So it's really well documented that that's what's there. And a recognition that lacking that sort of fire activity on the ground, we end up with buildups of fuel, fire under extreme weather conditions, and then we end up with these really large fires. And so the trade-off between having prescribed fire as a mechanism for reducing the intensity and severity of fires I think that's been the key seller here. But we're in a different environment where we're not facing that demand for really clean products coming in, right? And I would say that most of the burning where we're doing prescribed fire for understory and broadcast, that's occurring east of the Cascades or in southwestern Oregon, in these more dry site types in the really classic Douglas fir component of the state, up the Willamette Valley and the Western Cascades and across into the Coast Range in there. In those cases, the prescribed fire takes the form of pile burns, right? So pile burning is considered a form of prescribed fire. And in those cases, if we're doing those right, we're not producing bark char, right? And so there are opportunities there for still using fire, although I think this science is showing pretty conclusively that ground-based fire is pretty necessary in order to get your most reduction in wildfire risk.
Well, I think we are at time again. We've put our email addresses in the chat. Feel free to contact us with any of your questions, Eli. We'd love to hear more from you. Again, just a huge thanks to the Extension Foundation. I wouldn't be here today had I not received the fellowship years back that really helped like elevate all the work we're doing in Prescribed Fire, including those Prescribed Fire modules that led into then the Certified Burn Manager program. So just a huge thank you for that support. I really appreciate that. That's all from us, folks.
Thank you